there are these pervasive social media videos that are going around where you see ICE agents, they're masked, they're arresting people. It often has kind of if not actual violence, even a patina of violence. Literally, some of this stuff looks like recruitment posters out of the 1930s, and I don't mean that in a positive way. Recently, the Trump administration claimed that nearly 2 million undocumented immigrants were deported in their first 250 days. Whatever the accuracy of that number is, it has been disputed. It's clear that the enforcement has surged. Crossings have slowed. High-profile ICE raids are still all over the news and social media. The administration has made theater out of sending a large group of migrants to Venezuelan prisons that some have likened to gulags. And there have been a number of high-profile efforts to deport people like Mahmoud Khalil and Kilmar Abrego Garcia that have made headlines. At Christianity Today, Andy Olsen has been covering this issue and has reported on ICE showing up outside sanctuaries, on immigrants, and on immigrant families living in fear, among other stories. He joins us now. Andy, welcome back.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Let's start with that claim that we cited at the top. 2 million undocumented immigrants deported in the first 250 days. It's a dramatic benchmark. I'm curious, based on your reporting, do you think that that's close to reality?
Yeah, the number that you're referring to is, as best I can tell, it's based on data put out by the Center for Immigration Studies, which is actually based on government data. And my take is that, look, I don't think it's disputed that the foreign-born population in the United States is shrinking and has shrunk over the last 6 to 9 months. That 2 million, or actually 2.2 million figure, it might be a little inflated. I think primarily because, and while I'm no statistician, it's based on government data where the Population Bureau, gives you a phone call. And I don't know about you, but if I'm a foreign-born person and the government phones me and wants to talk about my household at any point in the last 6 to 9 months, I'm probably not going to answer that call. So I think those numbers are maybe a little inflated, but I don't think it's disputable that the immigration, that the administration's enforcement approach has been having an effect.
A lot of what seems like has been going on with this is, I mentioned the deporting of a bunch of people to that Venezuelan prison. I mean, this was a big thing. You had the big thing with what did they call it, Alligator Alcatraz, right? It seems like a lot of the theater has been for the purpose of creating an atmosphere of fear and incentivizing people to self-deport, right? I mean, Tom Homan has said as much. Is there evidence that is happening, that people who are here illegally are leaving voluntarily when they're able?
I do think it's certainly happening. I think, I talk to sources who tell me they're considering it, or I talk to sources at churches who say they had a friend who gave them a hug the other week and whispered to them that they were thinking about leaving. So I do think it's happening. I think the atmosphere of fear is sort of having some of its intended effect. And that 2 million person figure that you mentioned, it's important to note that takes into account a few factors. It would account for folks who have self-removed or who have voluntarily left. But it also accounts for, I think I've seen anywhere from, let's just say roughly half a million of those folks estimated in that study would be folks that just decided maybe they were here legally or lawfully on a visa, and they just decided this is not a country they wanted to be in anymore for right now. So it's not strictly speaking of undocumented folks.
Andy, have you seen, I had someone tell me just this week about a Christian here legally going through the process, but who now is afraid to go through the last steps of the process because that would mean going to immigration court, and this person's afraid of being taken in by ICE when he goes in to do that. Have you seen that happening?
I think that's a real and pervasive fear across the immigrant community. We've seen, certainly in the last few months, we've seen a dramatic increase in ICE's arrest of people who are going in, whether they're going to ICE field offices for routine check-ins, whether they're going to immigration courts to kind of complete next steps in their process. Those cases are all individual, and they're all a little bit different. There are circumstances certainly where someone is appealing essentially for mercy, and they're lawfully invited and welcome to do so. And in the precise moment that a judge says, well, no, we're going to deny perhaps this particular thing you're asking for, we see ICE agents rush in and arrest a person, even if that individual might be entitled to other forms of appeal. They just need to, say, file another piece of paperwork to kind of start the process for the next appeal. I think there are reasons to think that someone shouldn't fear, doing the right thing, going to a courthouse and taking the next steps toward lawful presence or becoming a permanent resident. But we're hearing lots of stories that give people reasons to pause. So yeah, that's a real fear.
Russ, I want to hear from you on this, because along with what we've already talked about, like there are these pervasive social media videos that are going around where you see ICE agents, they're masked, they're arresting people. It often has kind of if not actual violence, even a patina of violence. You see in the marketing that's around, like trying to recruit for ICE, the Homeland Security marketing. Literally, some of this stuff looks like recruitment posters out of the 1930s, and I don't mean that in a positive way, right? Mm-hmm. What is the cumulative effect of the kind of culture of fear that's being created here?
Well, I think ultimately it's going to have the opposite effect of what is intended, because if what we do is to end up putting merging together immigration enforcement with this kind of cruelty in terms of the way it's being presented, then you're going to end up with people who reject cruelty, rejecting immigration enforcement in lots of ways. So I think it's not a wise long-term thing to do, in addition to, of course, the moral questions and realities there. I mean, the masks are it's such a bizarre thing in American life to see law enforcement of any kind being masked in this way. I don't think that is having a good reaction from the American people. It doesn't cause the American people to feel the way that we do typically with law enforcement. Most people see in law enforcement, this is a good country, and this is a force for a moral structuring of order. That's not the response that's happening with this kind of advertising.
Yeah,
Russell, that's an interesting point you make, and I want to just add to it. I think we're going to see that dynamic, that sort of the workings of ICE eroding confidence in law enforcement more broadly. I do think that is something we'll see more of in coming months and years, right? If we look at the One Big Beautiful Bill, what it appropriates for increased internal enforcement. So I'm not talking about the money that's allocated for border security or even the money that's allocated for detention. But if you just look at the money that's allocated for both increased federal agents and the money that's allocated for underwriting immigration enforcement efforts at the state and local level, those figures, I've seen reports to the effect of those billions of dollars in total amount to more than the sum budget for all state and local law enforcement in the country, right? So if you think about the sheer volume of ICE enforcement that's going to be inflicted on the country in a sense, strictly from a budgetary standpoint, which translates to people, mostly apparently masked people. I do wonder about how it's going to continue to just overwhelm public perceptions of law enforcement in general, certainly making it perhaps more difficult for state and local law enforcement to do their jobs, right?
Right. Russ, I went back recently. This is an issue that you've written about for a long time. I went back and read your essay, I think it was from 2011, Immigration and the Gospel. And you argue that Christian rhetoric has to be informed by gospel and mission, not merely politics. Talk to us about that for a bit, because I think it's helpful to pull back and ask the question, like, how does the gospel inform all of this? You've got Christian nationalists making a certain kind of argument here. You also hear these arguments, from progressive Christians that often sound no different than those sort of open border progressivism. How do you navigate this question from a theological perspective?
Well, the gospel does not give us a blueprint on what immigration policy ought to be. So in terms of how many green cards should be allowed in any given year, or what do you do about people who were born here to parents who are undocumented, it doesn't give you a blueprint on all that. What it does do, though, is to shape and form a conscience about immigrants themselves.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think has really been under assault in recent years, is what do we think about immigrants? So when you have language, I mean, one of the key things is the use of language, the use of metaphor. When you see the kind of, we saw in the early 2010s a lot of use of anchor baby language, and then you started having comparison to household pests and insects and plagues and things like that, always very, very dangerous. Yeah. And that's where I think as Christians we have to say, no, this is not that's not who we are.
Right. Yeah, it seems like the last 150 years ought to have taught us that when any political regime starts referring to a population as vermin, it goes dark places really, really fast. Andy, I'm curious, how are inside immigrant communities? You've done some reporting on how immigrant communities are responding to the moment. Are there signs of life? Are there encouraging things that are happening that in the midst of a time that's clearly very trying?
I wish I could tell you that I see great signs of encouragement. That I feel like that would be the Christian hopeful perspective to offer, but I don't. I see, generally speaking, immigrant communities have really have sort of shut down, right? So restaurants and storefronts that used to be bustling in immigrant communities have kind of gone quiet. I continue to hear from pastors across the country who of immigrant congregations that have seen as much as an 80% or more drop in their attendance. Especially in communities where we've seen concentrated ICE sweeps, certainly in Los Angeles and other areas. I don't think I'm seeing a lot of silver linings here. If anything, I'll note one reason in particular why it's becoming more troubling. There was there's so much that's happened in the last 3 months. It's hard to even know where to start, but. In July, there was a leaked ICE memo that directed detention centers around the country, and particularly immigration judges who deal with detained populations, to no longer offer detainees bond to get out of detention. And so, not to get too much into the weeds, but the way detention commonly works is an immigrant is detained for whatever reason. And very often, to the tune of thousands of individuals a month, the detainees are released on bond, allowed to kind of continue to pursue their case on the outside in their communities, on the outside world, after they've paid $5, $10, $15,000 or whatever, just as it would, just as it works in our criminal justice system often. And so this ICE memo essentially directed judges and detention centers to stop offering bond in the vast majority of cases. And then there was a further ruling by this legal, by this group called the Board of Immigration Appeals, which sort of codifies it into immigration precedent, if you will. So all that to say, one of the probably the most important mechanism for getting individuals out of detention, which is bond, has all but been stripped away just in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And effectively what that would mean is that for the vast majority of individuals who ordinarily would have had a way to get out of detention, to return to their families while they're pursuing their legal case, in many cases they were also granted work permits when they were bonded so they could continue working and being breadwinners. That door has been closed. And because of the decision by the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is sort of precedent setting for the whole system, there's really no appealing it. There's no way around it now. And so I have, in the last week or two, been having conversations with immigration attorneys who are really despairing about this because they're sort of presenting this as this was our last. If we can't get individuals out of detention, it becomes very difficult to represent them, and it really becomes very difficult to so much as even communicate with them. And I think that we will see this really have significant effects. Not coincidentally, as ICE's capacity for detention dramatically increases over the next year or whatever because of this budget increase. So I think that will be the next kind of concern that looms large over the immigrant community.
Andy, one of the things I hear a lot are from people who are afraid to go to church because of ICE sweeps, but I haven't really heard of that happening. Or do you? Is this a legitimate fear that people have to say I'm not gonna go to church for fear that that I'm going to be found there?
That's a good question, and I think it's something that so far is more scary in the hypothetical than in the actual right now.
Yeah.
I have not heard, and I don't think I've seen any credible reports of an actual ICE raid on a church. ICE agents entering a church during a worship service. We have seen and reported on incidents where they came close but didn't quite cross that sort of. There's a sacred line there, even though they've ostensibly been given permission to do so. What we do see more commonly, though, is ICE arresting people on the way to or from church, right? So if ICE is interested in an individual, they know that individual's license plate number, they know the car they drive, they very often know where they live, and so and they tend to track people and focus enforcement efforts in what for ICE would be the least disruptive ways. So that is, if you work at a big factory outside of Charlotte, it's going to be logistically very difficult for ICE to enter that factory and extract you from there. But it's much simpler for them if they can catch you on a Sunday morning when you're driving to church, when the streets are quiet and you've sort of let your guard down. So those are the reasons primarily that a lot of immigrants are staying away from church. And also this happens very commonly, for instance, for families who are dropping their kids off or picking their kids up from school, right? That's another common and sort of tragic way that people are detained is, after you've made the school run with the kids. Yeah.
I want to wrap with this. There's been some interesting critique of reporting like yours, Andy, and other people who are sort of following these stories, getting into the lives of the people who this affects. And the idea is that by emphasizing, these individual stories, you're sort of leveraging. It's like the toxic empathy argument or the weaponized empathy argument. You're sort of leveraging empathy for the individual to argue for relaxed enforcement in some form. I'd love to hear from either of you what your response to that is. Is that a fair critique, or as well. I'll leave it there because I'll start answering my own question if I keep talking. So,
yeah, I'm happy to take it first. In my reporting, this will sound almost like a throwaway response, but it is nonetheless true. I mean, we just try to tell the stories of people who are impacted by the system, right? And I don't think that it's inconsistent with evangelical faith and evangelical tradition to do so. I mean, we have a long and proud history in the evangelical movement of, for instance, investing in prison ministry. And prison ministry is rooted in the belief that even incarcerated individuals, even individuals who have been convicted of serious crimes, right, are worthy of love and mercy and compassion. And so I think it matters as a journalist to tell the stories of how individuals are being impacted by the system and by policy choices. And I don't think in my reporting, I'm not ever trying to make arguments against enforcing the law. But we live in a nation that's governed by a constitution and that offers due process, etc. And I think there is a defensible Christian conviction that upholding the law still, there are right ways and wrong ways to uphold the law. And I think by continuing to report on what's happening within the system, we can reflect a mirror back on ourselves and our society and ask, are we upholding the law in the right ways or the wrong ways?
Mm-hmm.
And the prison ministry analogy, I think, is especially apt because we have seen ways where that personal connection between churches and evangelical ministries with prisoners has led to reforms of the way we do prisons that nobody ever would have even thought about before. So, for instance, with Chuck Colson working on the issue of prison rape and talking to Christians and saying, the idea that somehow because somebody is incarcerated, that means that we should abandon them to this awful reality is wrong. That actually had an effect on policy. Same thing with the way that pregnant women giving birth being shackled while giving birth. It was because you had churches that were in there doing ministry with people. They saw the personal reality and said, we probably wouldn't even have known this was going on if we hadn't seen that. I think that's a good thing.
And that comes back to that fundamental issue of human dignity, right? Like the core theological principle here. So, well, Andy, thank you for your reporting. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.